echoes of terror.
Cold, lost, alone. This is the frozen heart. The wind howled a mournful dirge, rattling the windows of the isolated cabin. Inside, Elias huddled closer to the dying embers of the fire, the biting cold seeping into his bones. He'd sought refuge here, deep in the Adirondack wilderness, hoping to escape the relentless gnawing of grief after his wife Clara had succumbed to a swift, merciless illness. But the solitude, the oppressive silence punctuated only by the wind's fury, was a breeding ground for his demons. The snow had been falling for days, a relentless white curtain that had swallowed the world. The cabin, a relic of a simpler time, groaned under the weight of the accumulating drifts. Elias was alone, utterly cut off. His supplies were dwindling, and a gnawing fear, colder than the winter chill, was beginning to take root. He'd started seeing things, flickering shadows in the periphery of his vision, whispers carried on the wind that sounded eerily like Clara's voice. He dismissed them as hallucinations, the product of exhaustion and grief. But they were growing more frequent, more vivid. One evening, as the wind reached a fevered pitch, Elias heard a scratching at the door. He froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. It couldn't be human. No one would be out in this blizzard. The scratching persisted, a slow, deliberate rhythm that sent shivers down his spine. He peered through the frosted window pane, his breath fogging the glass. He saw nothing, just the swirling snow, the skeletal branches of the trees swaying in the wind. He told himself it was just a branch scraping against the door, but a primal fear whispered otherwise. He grabbed the heavy iron poker from beside the fireplace, his hand trembling. He crept towards the door, his senses on high alert. The scratching stopped. He held his breath, listening. Silence. A silence so profound it was almost deafening. Then he heard it again. A soft, almost imperceptible rustling sound coming from the roof. Something was moving up there. Something heavy. Elias's blood ran cold. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he wasn't alone. He backed away from the door, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. He imagined something crawling, something inhuman, its icy claws scraping against the shingles. The rustling grew louder, closer. He could hear the creaking of the old wood, the shifting of the snow. It was directly above him now. He could feel the weight of it, pressing down on the cabin, on him. He closed his eyes, bracing himself for the inevitable. He waited for the roof to collapse, for the creature to drop down on him, its icy grip closing around his throat. But it didn't come. The rustling stopped. Silence descended once more, heavier, more oppressive than before. Elias opened his eyes, his gaze darting around the room. Everything was still. The fire was dying, casting long, dancing shadows that played tricks on his eyes. He let out a shaky breath, trying to convince himself that he'd imagined it all. But deep down, he knew the truth. Something was out there. Something was watching him. Then he saw it. A single icy blue eye peering down at him from a crack in the ceiling. It was impossibly large, impossibly bright, glowing with an otherworldly light. It was fixed on him, filled with a malevolent intelligence that made his blood run cold. He screamed, a raw, primal sound that was swallowed by the wind. He stumbled backwards, tripping over a rug and falling to the floor. The eye remained, watching him, its icy blue gaze piercing his soul. He scrambled to his feet, desperate to escape. He ran towards the door, throwing it open and plunging out into the blizzard. The wind howled around him, stinging his face with icy needles. He didn't know where he was going. He just wanted to get away from the cabin, from the eye, from the fear that was consuming him. He ran blindly through the snow, his lungs burning, his legs aching. He could hear the creature behind him, its heavy footsteps crunching through the snow. He didn't dare look back. He knew that if he did, he would see it. Its icy form looming over him, its skeletal hand reaching out to claim him. He ran until he could run no more, collapsing in the snow, his body trembling with exhaustion and fear. He looked up at the sky, the swirling snow blurring his vision. He saw the eye again, floating in the darkness, watching him, waiting. He closed his eyes, waiting for the end. He felt the cold embrace of the snow, the numbness creeping over his body. He thought of Clara, her warm smile, her gentle touch. He wished he could see her one last time. Then he felt something else. An icy breath on his neck, a whisper in his ear. Elias. He opened his eyes. The creature was there, standing over him, its icy blue eyes filled with a chilling triumph. It reached out, its skeletal hand closing around his throat. And then, everything went dark. The creature's grip tightened, the icy cold seeping into Elias's skin. He gasped for air, his vision blurring. He could feel the life draining from him, the warmth fading, replaced by a chilling numbness. He thought of Clara again, her laughter echoing in his memory, a stark contrast to the icy grip that was stealing his breath. He tried to fight, to claw at the creature's hand, but his movements were weak, futile. He felt himself being lifted, his body dangling in the creature's grasp like a rag doll. He looked up at the creature's face, finally seeing it clearly in the dim light filtering through the swirling snow. It wasn't a monster, not in the traditional sense. It was frozen. Its features were sharp, angular, etched in ice. Its skin was translucent, revealing glimpses of the frozen structure beneath. A delicate network of ice crystals like a fractal snowflake. Its eyes, those piercing icy blue orbs, held not malice, but an ancient sorrow, a profound loneliness. The creature didn't speak, but Elias felt a wave of understanding wash over him. He understood the creature's pain, its isolation, its desperate longing. It wasn't trying to kill him. It was trying to share its fate. The creature carried Elias towards the edge of the woods, its movements unnervingly graceful despite its frozen form. Elias's struggles grew weaker, his consciousness fading. He felt a strange sense of acceptance, a resignation to his fate. He was going to join the creature, become one of them. A frozen echo in a desolate winter landscape. They reached a clearing, a circle of ancient trees draped in snow. In the center of the clearing, a swirling vortex of snow shimmered, a portal to some unknown frozen realm. The creature approached the vortex, its grip on Elias tightening. Elias closed his eyes, bracing for the inevitable. He imagined the icy transformation, the slow creep of the cold, the freezing of his blood, the encasing of his soul in ice. He imagined becoming like the creature, a frozen sentinel, forever bound to the winter's embrace. But then, something unexpected happened. The creature stopped. It stood at the edge of the vortex, its icy blue eyes fixed on Elias. For a long moment, it remained motionless, as if making a decision. Then, slowly, deliberately, it lowered Elias to the ground. Elias lay there, gasping for breath, his body trembling with cold. He looked up at the creature, confused, unsure of what was happening. The creature looked back at him, its expression unreadable. It reached out a hand, not to grab him, but to touch him. Its icy fingers brushed against Elias's forehead, sending a jolt of cold through his body. But the cold wasn't painful, it was soothing. It was as if the creature was sharing a part of itself, a fragment of its frozen essence. Then, the creature turned away. It stepped into the swirling vortex of snow and vanished. The vortex shimmered for a moment, then disappeared, leaving the clearing silent and still. Elias lay there, alone in the snow, the wind whispering through the trees. He was cold, but he wasn't frozen. He was alive. The creature had spared him. He didn't understand why, but he was grateful. He slowly got to his feet, his body aching, his mind reeling. He looked around the clearing, searching for any sign of the creature, but it was gone, as if it had never existed. He was alone again, but it was a different kind of alone. He was no longer afraid. He had faced the darkness, and he had survived. He turned and walked back towards the cabin, his steps slow and deliberate. He knew that he would never be the same. He had seen the face of winter, the frozen heart of the storm. He had glimpsed the loneliness, the desperation, the ancient sorrow, and he had been spared. He had been given a second chance. He reached the cabin, the dying embers of the fire casting a warm glow in the darkness. He went inside, closed the door, and huddled by the fire, the warmth slowly returning to his body. He thought of Clara, her memory a beacon in the darkness. He knew that he would never forget the creature, the frozen sentinel of the winter woods. He knew that he would carry the memory of its icy blue eyes, its ancient sorrow, its unexpected mercy with him forever. He had been touched by the winter's heart, and he had survived. He had been given a second chance, and he knew that he would not waste it. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the cabin walls. Elias sat huddled close, the warmth slowly seeping back into his numb limbs. He stared into the flames. The image of the creature's icy blue eyes burned into his mind. He replayed the encounter over and over, trying to understand why he had been spared. Was it a trick of his imagination? A hallucination brought on by grief and isolation? Or had he truly encountered something else? He looked around the small cabin, a sense of unease creeping back into his heart. The silence, once oppressive, now felt charged, pregnant with unseen presences. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind against the windows made him jump. He knew he couldn't stay here. The cabin, once a refuge, now felt like a trap. He rose, his muscles stiff and aching. He gathered what little supplies he had left, a few cans of beans, some dried meat, a tattered blanket. He knew he had to leave, to find help, to escape the lingering chill that had settled in his bones. He opened the door, a blast of icy wind hitting him in the face. The blizzard had subsided, but the world was still a frozen wasteland. The snow lay deep. The trees were skeletal silhouettes against the gray sky. He stepped out into the biting cold, his breath clouding in the air. As he began to trudge through the snow, he noticed something. A set of tracks leading away from the cabin. They weren't human tracks. They were large, uneven, with deep claw marks. They were the tracks of something inhuman. Elias's heart pounded in his chest. He followed the tracks, his gaze darting nervously around him. The tracks led him deeper into the woods, towards the clearing where he had encountered the creature. As he approached the clearing, he saw something that made his blood run cold. In the center of the clearing, where the swirling vortex had been, there was now a figure. It was the creature, standing motionless, its icy blue eyes fixed on him. But it wasn't alone. Surrounding it were other figures, equally frozen, equally gaunt. They were all staring at him, their icy blue eyes burning with an otherworldly light. Elias froze, his breath catching in his throat. He wanted to run, to escape, but his legs felt like lead. He was trapped, surrounded by these frozen sentinels. He knew that he couldn't fight them. He knew that he couldn't escape. The creature in the center of the clearing raised its hand, its long, skeletal fingers beckoning him closer. Elias hesitated, his mind racing. What did it want? Why had it spared him only to bring him here? He took a tentative step forward, then another. He felt a strange compulsion drawing him towards the creature, a sense of inevitability. He was being pulled into their world, the world of the frozen, the lost, the damned. As he got closer, he could see the details of the other figures. They were all different, some tall and thin, others short and stocky. Some were dressed in rags, others in tattered remnants of fine clothing. But they all had one thing in common. Their icy blue eyes filled with the same ancient sorrow, the same profound loneliness. He reached the creature in the center of the clearing. It stood before him, its icy blue eyes piercing his soul. He looked into those eyes, and he saw not malice, but a desperate plea, a longing for connection. The creature reached out again, its icy fingers brushing against his cheek. This time, the cold was different. It wasn't the biting cold of the storm, but a deep, penetrating cold that seeped into his very being. He felt his blood slowing, his heart beating slower, his thoughts becoming sluggish. He closed his eyes, accepting his fate. He was going to join them, become one of them, a frozen echo in the desolate winter landscape. He was going to be lost, like them, forever trapped in the icy grip of the storm. But as the cold began to consume him, he heard a faint whisper, a voice that he recognized. It was Clara's voice, calling his name. Elias! He realized then that the creature hadn't brought him here to join them. It had brought him here to show him the true cost of the winter's wrath, the devastating power of isolation and despair. It had shown him the fate that awaited him if he succumbed to the cold, both the physical cold and the emotional cold that had threatened to consume him after Clara's death. The creature stepped back, its icy blue eyes softening. It was releasing him. It was giving him a second chance, not just at life, truly living. Elias took a deep breath, the cold air filling his lungs. He looked at the creature, a sense of gratitude washing over him. He knew that he would never forget this encounter, never forget the icy blue eyes, the ancient sorrow, the unexpected mercy. He turned and walked away from the clearing, back towards the cabin, back towards the world of the living. He knew that he had been changed forever. He had faced the darkness, and he had found not death, but life. He had been touched by the winter's heart, and he had been given a second chance. And he knew that he would not waste it. He would live, not just for himself, but for Clara, and for all those who had been lost to the cold, both the physical cold and the cold of despair. He would remember.